What's up everyone and welcome back to the World History Channel. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button today. Let's get started. It's likely that Christopher Columbus brought syphilis from the New World. In addition to commemorating the first steps taken toward the establishment of the United States, Columbus Day has evolved into a time to re-evaluate what we know about the renowned explorer. Although Christopher Columbus's accomplishments are numerous and well known, much of his life and subsequent voyages to the Americas are lost in myth and misconception. Even though Christopher Columbus did, in fact, sail the Blue Ocean in 1492, his biography is full of obscure facts and historical oddities that never make it into any school nursery rhyme or textbook. Even though we know he didn't set out from Spain to prove the earth was round, many people still hold the belief that Columbus did. We also think that he made friendly contact with the people of what he thought was India, but he didn't, and that he actually thought he was in Japan, a mythical land. Could he have even made it there? What is the situation with his other trips to the New World? Or his revisionist reputation for treating natives with brutality and cruelty? The majority of people are unaware of the following facts about Columbus despite decades of re-examination. His real name wasn't Christopher Columbus. Cristoforo Colombo, or Cristobal Colón if you speak Spanish, was the name of the famous explorer. Anglicized Christopher Columbus is his name, but he probably wouldn't have answered to that, since no portrait of Colón/Columbus was created during his lifetime. His appearance is one of the other aspects of his life that is unknown. Despite sailing for Spain, he was not Spanish. Despite sailing under the Spanish crown, Columbus was definitely not born Spanish. His upbringing is unknown, but it is generally agreed that he was born in Genoa, a city-state that was an independent city at the time and a satellite of Spain. Today, he would be regarded as Italian. Few people still held the belief that the earth was flat. Writers like Washington Irving have ingrained the idea that Columbus set out to disprove Catholic teachings that the earth is flat in the public mind. However, most people already knew that the earth was round. Pythagoras, a Greek mathematician, used mathematics to conclude that the world was round in the 6th century BCE. Later, Aristotle proved it with astronomical observations, and Eratosthenes used geometry to estimate the world's circumference. By 1492, most educated people knew the planet was not a flat disk. Columbus did not set out to discover the New World. Even though Columbus discovered the uncharted territory that would later become known as the New World, it was not what he was looking for. He wanted to get to Asia faster without having to cross the Silk Road, which was closed off when Constantinople fell to the Ottoman Empire in 1453. His journey was intended to take advantage of the reputed abundance of gold and spices in the Orient and acquire some for himself. Asia would never have come to him. The Canary Islands, where Columbus began his journey, were approximately 3,700 kilometers away from the Japan he was attempting to reach, which was then known as Cipangu. The actual distance is approximately 12,000 kilometers, so this was a significant underestimation. These ships would not have been able to withstand the harsh conditions of the Pacific, and Columbus's small fleet would never have been able to carry enough supplies to last on such a journey. His motivations were not charitable. His initial offer to sail to the Orient to King John II of Portugal resulted in him receiving a substantial reward. He asked for the title Great Admiral of the Ocean, to be made governor of any and all lands he found, and to receive 1/10 of all revenue from those lands, which would have required a significant amount of gold. Before the Spanish kings Ferdinand and Isabella agreed to pay for Columbus, Portugal turned down this and a number of other proposals. But even they initially turned him down, believing that his plan was impossible. Almost certainly not the first European to discover the New World was Columbus. Most historians agree that the Norse Viking Leif Erikson arrived in Newfoundland around 1000 CE, which is 500 years before Christopher Columbus set sail. Additionally, it has been proposed, but not proven, that Celtic explorers crossed the Atlantic prior to Erikson. Columbus' exact location is unknown. The modern-day Bahamas were what Columbus discovered while searching for Japan. His 3-ship fleet left the Canary Islands on September 6 and were pushed westward by strong winds until they reached land on October 12. Columbus thought he had discovered Asia when he referred to this island as San Salvador. It has been narrowed down to 3 possible islands, but it is still unknown where he first set foot. He began brutal acts as soon as he landed. In popular culture, Columbus's actions as a sword evangelist and slave trader are becoming increasingly well known. Additionally, these actions began almost immediately. The natives of the islands known as the Arawak or Taino were the first natives he encountered on San Salvador. They were kind and peaceful, so Columbus quickly imprisoned a group of them so he could question them about where the gold from the Orient was. The Arawaks were brutally treated by the Spanish during their subsequent colonization of the Bahamas, and they were nearly all extinct within half a century. Not all 3 ships made it through the journey. From October 12, 1493, to January 15, 1493, Columbus and his crew, whose numbers had decreased as a result of sickness and mutiny, traveled up and down the Bahamas. However, it is not widely known that the Santa Maria grounded on Christmas Day and did not make it through the trip. In order to demonstrate his Spanish firepower to the natives, Columbus ordered the ship to be evacuated and blown up with cannons. Columbus then snapped up about 24 natives to take back as slaves, left 39 men to establish a colony on what's now Haiti, then headed back to Spain. Conquest was the sole focus of Columbus's second voyage. Exploration was the focus of Columbus's first journey to the Orient. The second, on the other hand, was always going to be about colonization and, if necessary, armed conflict. On September 23, 1493, he left Spain with a massive fleet of 17 ships and 1,200 people. Farmers, priests sent to convert native people to Christianity, and armed soldiers sent to impose Columbus's will were among the passengers. On the second voyage, armed conflict broke out. Dominica is now a small island nation in the Caribbean that Columbus and his fleet landed on. He sailed up and down the Lesser Antilles, went back to check on the 39 men he'd left behind at the colony of La Navidad, which had been destroyed with 11 men murdered by the natives for raping local women, and in an omen of things to come, had an armed skirmish with several tribesmen caught castrating 2 boys from a different tribe. He set up a few small colonies, bought 500 slaves from the Caribbean, and went back to Spain. On the third voyage, he still hoped to locate the Orient. Due to machinations within the Spanish court, Columbus's third voyage to the New World was delayed by nearly 2 years. He only had 7 ships when he finally set sail from Spain in May 1498. Several of them went to colonies that had already been established, while Columbus and the majority of his fleet went south, still hoping to find the mythical route to the Orient. He discovered Trinidad and Venezuela instead. However, the worst was still to come. Shameful was the outcome of the third voyage. Columbus returned to the colony of Hispaniola, where the Santa Maria had stopped on the first voyage, because he was exhausted and in poor health after exploring South America for several months. He was greeted by chaos upon arrival. The colonists were dissatisfied, starving, and threatening mutiny. The natives suffered horrendous treatment and frequently responded by killing the colonists. The Taino natives had engaged in an armed revolt that was crushed in 1497, and Columbus and his brothers were cruel governors. Ferdinand and Isabella ordered Columbus and his brothers to be arrested and taken back to Spain in chains after receiving numerous complaints about his governorship and cruelty. The fourth journey was disastrous. Columbus appeared in front of Ferdinand and Isabella after spending a few months behind bars. They granted him a pardon and paid for a fourth voyage, but they took away his governorship. Columbus set out in May 1502 on 4 old ships to find a way to the Indian Ocean. He left Cadiz. Instead, he got lost, sailed through a hurricane that destroyed the first Spanish treasure fleet, had 2 ships sink, and had to land the other 2 on the beach in Jamaica, where he remained stranded for a year. By predicting a lunar eclipse on February 29, 1504, he persuaded the locals to provide his desperate men with food and water while they were there. In June, a relief ship showed up, but Columbus didn't have anything when he got to Spain in November. Columbus was after his own Columbus put in a lot of time and effort to make sure he got what he wanted, fitting for someone who wanted to explore new lands primarily for the purpose of making money. Book of Privileges was written by Columbus in 1502, shortly before the fourth voyage. It was a lengthy account of all of the titles, riches, positions of power, and rewards he expected the Spanish crown to give him and his descendants as part of his 10% share of the exploration. He had transformed into a zombie crank. Columbus, like many other greats of his time, juggled a strong desire to explore with a strong religious outlook. In the Book of Prophecies, which was published in 1501, he compiled a number of apocalyptic reveals. Some of these were that Spain's King Ferdinand would be the last world emperor, and that the Garden of Eden is out there waiting to be discovered. His remains traveled the world after his death. Columbus got food poisoning on one of his trips, which caused him to get reactive arthritis, which was thought to be gout at the time. Suffering from that, as well as various other ailments he contracted during the 4 voyages, Columbus died in 1506 in Valladolid, Spain. Diego, Columbus's son and the newly appointed governor of Hispaniola, interred his father's remains in Seville after first burying them there. The body was moved to what is now the Dominican Republic in 1542. When France took over Hispaniola in 1795, the remains of Columbus were moved once more, this time to Havana, Cuba. The remains were relocated back to Spain following Cuba's independence in 1898 as a result of the Spanish-American War. However, it is possible that not all of them were relocated, and Columbus may actually have resting places in both Spain and Cuba. For centuries, there were lawsuits against his estate. The children of Columbus fought the Spanish crown for a long time after his death, claiming that the monarchy had denied them the money, titles, and property they were entitled to. By 1536, most of the Colombian lawsuits had been settled. The Colon family got the perpetual title of Admiral of the Indies, claims on land in Jamaica, Hispaniola, and other islands, and a lot of money to pay each year. The legal proceedings, known as the Pleitos Colombinos, dragged on well into the 18th century due to the numerous claims still to unravel. He bequeathed an intricate legacy. Columbus was hailed as the hero who discovered America for centuries, and on October 12th, he is still honored by a federal holiday. However, over the course of the past few decades, a growing body of knowledge has emerged regarding Columbus's blatant ignorance of numerous aspects of ocean travel, as well as his legacy of brutality toward native people, the capturing and movement of slaves, and his brutality toward native people. It is undisputed that Columbus was a tyrannical governor of Hispaniola. He established a system of government in which slaves were frequently shipped back to Spain, and natives were mutilated for not meeting their gold mining quotas. However, he was also a daring explorer who traveled the Atlantic on 4 occasions, traversing treacherous waters, adverse weather, and uncharted territory. The New World colonization also left behind a complicated legacy. It set in motion the events that would eventually lead to the United States and the modern world, while simultaneously eradicating native peoples from San Salvador all the way through the western part of the United States. Is Columbus a brave pioneer or a monster who conquered the world? In point of fact, probably both. One of the most devastating pandemics of early modern Europe may have been brought about by Christopher Columbus, whose name has been ingrained in American mythology for a long time. Even though schoolchildren still recite rhymes about the explorer who sailed the blue ocean in 1492, fewer people are aware of the horrific medical consequences he left behind. Historians and epidemiologists are increasingly of the opinion that the earliest outbreak of syphilis in Europe, which occurred shortly after Columbus returned, may have originated in the Americas and spread as a result of the sexual activities of his crew. In point of fact, the first known outbreak of syphilis in Europe began in Naples in 1495, just 3 years after Columbus made landfall in the Caribbean. The epidemic's sudden and severe spread shocked the continent. The fact that genetic studies of the bacterium that causes syphilis, Treponema pallidum, suggest a New World origin makes this more than just a case of bad timing. Before Europeans came into contact with Central and South America, closely related treponemal diseases like yaws and pinta were common. Some experts believe that the bacteria mutated into the sexually transmitted nightmare that ravaged the Old World when they were transported to colder European climates. These non-venereal forms of the disease evolved over centuries in the Americas. The fact that sailors and soldiers, especially those returning from long voyages or wars, were notorious for engaging in promiscuous sex, frequently with prostitutes or by coercing native populations, did not help matters. During his travels, Columbus and his men are said to have horrifyingly frequently shackled native women. As part of the conqueror's spoils, several first-hand accounts from the initial expeditions describe the sexual abuse of indigenous girls, some as young as 9 or 10 years old. Sexually transmitted diseases could have been exchanged in both directions, as Columbus himself wrote in a cold manner about giving his men native women. It's hard to ignore the coincidence between the voyages and the disease outbreak. There are no reliable reports of a disease similar to syphilis in Europe prior to 1492. After the Nia, Pinta, and Santa Maria returned to port after just a few years, all hell broke loose. The disease was dubbed the Great Pox, as opposed to smallpox, because of its gruesome symptoms. It started out as small cuts and rashes, progressed to large wounds on the skin and in the genitals, and eventually destroyed bone and brain tissue, resulting in irrational behavior and death. It reached every major European port shortly after the siege of Naples due to its lightning-fast spread, particularly among soldiers. As nations blamed each other for the catastrophe, they referred to it as the Neapolitan disease, the French disease, and the Polish disease. However, the true cause may be in the Americas, thousands of miles away. Before 1492, pre-Columbian indigenous people's skeletons showed signs of treponemal infection, but European burial sites before the late 15th century lack similar evidence. The epidemiological evidence supports the Columbian hypothesis, which holds that syphilis originated in the Americas. There is no fossil evidence to support the alternative multi-regional theory that some researchers have proposed, which suggests that syphilis was already present in Europe but evolved independently. On the other hand, historical pathology and genetic sequencing have both contributed to the popularity of the Columbian theory. Despite the fact that it had a significant impact on European history, this negative aspect of Columbus's legacy is frequently left out of mainstream narratives. The explosion of syphilis led to widespread panic and moral hysteria. Some of the earliest sexually repressive laws and ideas in modern Western history emerged as a result of society becoming obsessed with containing sexual deviance, doctors turning to mercury-based treatments, and churches preaching that sin was divine punishment. Some even argue that people began to question the Catholic Church's inability to alleviate suffering, and that syphilis accelerated the Protestant Reformation. In the meantime, European peasants and kings alike would be ravaged generation after generation by syphilis. It has been suggested that historical figures like Henry VIII, Ivan the Terrible, and even Napoleon Bonaparte had it. The disease continued to plague Europe for centuries, only finally declining in the modern era with the advent of antibiotics like penicillin. However, in the 1490s, this new disease spread with the same brutality as Spanish swords did to indigenous people. In a cruel irony, the colonizers who introduced smallpox and measles to the New World may have carried back syphilis as their own biological curse. Syphilis continues to be one of the most stark symbols of the immense human suffering on both sides of the Atlantic, and the tragedy of the Columbian exchange encompasses both crops and diseases. A legacy that cannot be simplified has been left behind by Columbus, who was once hailed as a visionary but is now frequently portrayed as a villain. The evidence suggests that his expeditions were a turning point not only in global geopolitics but also in global disease ecology, regardless of whether he brought syphilis from the New World. It's a reminder that history's greatest moments of discovery are often entangled with catastrophe, and that the birth of the modern world may have come with a hidden cost written in sores, madness, and pain. As new research continues to probe the origins of syphilis, one thing is clear. Columbus's impact reached much further than he or his royal patrons could have imagined, not just across continents, but into the bloodstream of Europe itself. Surprises abound in the fascinating world of history, including the numerous historical figures who had syphilis. We've compiled a list of these well-known people that sheds light on the difficulties they faced, how they dealt with the disease, and how it affected their careers and lives. In addition to educating us about these influential figures' personal struggles, this list also aims to remind us of the historical significance of syphilis in shaping medical science, social attitudes, and stigma. We offer a glimpse into the lives of 6 important people who contracted syphilis in this article. These individuals, who came from a variety of eras and backgrounds and included great thinkers, royals and celebrities, faced similar health issues but had varying experiences and responses. Romantic poet Lord Byron, who was well known for his extravagant lifestyle and controversial love affairs, and Scottish King James V, whose syphilis-related death allowed his daughter, Mary Queen of Scots, to ascend to the throne, are among those included. Other notable figures who had syphilis include Diego Rivera, a prominent Mexican painter and notorious womanizer; Paul Gauguin, a French post-impressionist artist deeply influenced by Tahiti where the disease was prevalent; infamous gangster Al Capone, who eventually succumbed to the disease while incarcerated; and Elizabeth I, the queen who ruled England during one of its most prosperous eras. Her life an eternal source of fascination and speculation. Although syphilis was not the cause of death for every person on this list, each person fought the disease in their own way, reflecting the medical capabilities of their time and the attitudes of society toward the disease. These figures' stories demonstrate that, despite personal difficulties, they had a significant impact on their fields and left behind long-lasting legacy. Beyond their medical histories, don't miss out on the fascinating details about these historical figures. Explore in greater detail the ways in which their encounters with the disease shaped who they were and, ultimately, the contributions they made to humanity. As a result, take advantage of this unique perspective on history. Delve into the private lives of these historical figures who were afflicted with syphilis, and learn more about how the disease affected both their personal lives and society as a whole.